first things first, can you hear me? Excellent, thank you. Thank you for welcoming me here today. Thank you to Sarah for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be here. My name is Johnny Kinsman. I grew up in the area. I grew up in Concord, Mass, and as a little kid, I was interested in theater and being in plays, and that's where I learned, as a young kid, not only, how to be okay in front of a crowd, but to actually enjoy being in front of a crowd. And years went by, and I ended up, through adventure and misadventure, getting a job with the tourism company, Boston Duck Tours. And I still work for them today. Now I help to hire and train their tour guides. And what we do is we teach people how to tell sometimes dry stories in a compelling way that is relatable to, people who have purchased tickets. And my training when I got the job was so perfectly meshed with my interests. I've always been interested in history, I've been interested in presenting and storytelling. And so time and again, I will find a topic that I don't know that much about, but I've always been curious. And the next thing you know, I'm standing here giving a talk about it and, telling people what I think are wonderful stories. And so today, the topic at hand is Guy Fawkes Day, how we remember the 5th of November beyond the Gunpowder Plot. Now this year, November 5th, is a rather important day in the United States. I don't know if you guys have heard. There's a big deal going on. Of course, we have the election coming up, and that's on the 5th. So that date has been rattling around in people's brains, with more and more anxiety day by day lately. But absent an election year, November 5th is just another day on the calendar in the United States. It doesn't have any sort of, immediate association with it. However, if you talk to a British person or anybody who grew up in a part of the world that used to be under British rule, and you say to them, remember, odds are they're going to parrot right back, the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and plot. So, today, here in Wellesley, Massachusetts, in the United States of America, we are going to unpack what these Brits are talking about. What is the gunpowder treason? What is the plot? Who was involved? What was the aftermath of it? And how has the understanding of what that event meant changed over the years as November the 5th is remembered? So, to jump into the story, we have to go all the way back to England's 16th century. King Henry VIII, famous to the point of infamy, mostly because of his relationships with his wives. Putting it as kindly as I possibly can. He's a monarch after all. So King Henry is married to this woman named Catherine of Aragon. And he's not happy. She's getting a little long in the tooth, and she hasn't produced a male heir to the throne, and he doesn't want to subscribe to this newfangled idea of a female heir actually taking the throne. And so, being a good Catholic subject, King Henry goes to the Pope, Pope Clement VII, and he says, "Pope, I need an annulment from this marriage. I can't have this wife anymore. I need a new one. And there's this wonderful woman I love called Anne Boleyn. We'll get to that in a minute." And the Pope says, "Well, I'm very sorry to hear this predicament you're in, but the answer is no. No annulment for you. You're married in the eyes of God, you're married in the eyes of the Catholic Church, and that is how it shall stay." King Henry, as a protest to this decision of Clement VII, and as a protest to the very Church of Catholicism, decides that he's going to form a church of his own, the Protestant Church, the Protestants, the Church of England. And while he is waving his kingly scepter around, he decides also that he's going to name himself the supreme head of the Church of England. I mean, why not? He's just making it up as he goes along anyway. And so he banishes Catherine of Aragon. And he marries Anne Boleyn. And then that doesn't work out, and she gets beheaded, and then he marries another woman named Jane Seymour, not to be confused with the actress, Dr. Quinn, medicine woman. And then she finally bears him a son, a male heir to the throne. And he's a sickly child. And it's a deep concern to Henry VIII, because if this kid doesn't grow up to be a bloodthirsty, tyrannical king, then all of this work that Henry has done to spite the Catholic Church is going to be unraveled. And all of a sudden, we're going to slide back into Catholicism and marriages according to the Catholic Bible, not the new Bible. And so these fears ended up being well-founded. But little Edward VI takes the throne at 9 years old. And because he's a kid, he's not doing very much ruling of his own. He does have this council of like 16 advisors. And one of these advisors produces a big slam dunk for little Edward VI. What he does is, in this brief reign, Thomas Cranmer, the royal advisor, writes the Book of Common Prayer, 1549. And this uniformity of worship helped turn England into a Protestant state. So now everybody has the same prayers, and they say them the same way in the churches, and it is starting to really pick up some steam here, this Protestant church against the Catholic idea of, a king not being able to get an annulment. So little Edward dies in 1553, just a few years after this Book of Common Prayer is released to the public, and he is succeeded by his half-sister named Mary the First. That's quite a mug on Mary the First. Mary is just as hard a person as she appears in her portrait. This is not, oh, you got my bad side. She's going, no, you're painting me exactly right. Mary the First decides that she is going to re-Catholicize England. She's going to unravel all of this nonsense with the Protestant church and the supreme ruler, this and that, out. Catholic again. Why would she do this? Why? Is she such a devout Catholic that it just hasn't been right for her? Maybe. Is she the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, who was jilted and banished for absolutely no reason except for the whim of Henry VIII? That's more like it. And so she is very systematically and purposefully dismantling Henry and Edward's vision of, sticking it to the Catholic Church. Those who did not renounce their Protestant beliefs were burned at the stake. She was so ruthless in her methods of re-Catholicizing the country that she got the nickname Bloody Mary. That's where that comes from. And you just thought it was from South Pacific with the Beatles. Yes?
She's holding a rose or a carnation?
Oh, that's a great question. Up close, it looks to me like a carnation, but the color is a rose. Oh, that's out of my pay grade. I don't know. I will get back to you. Put us in the calendar for next year. I'm going to have an answer. So, the next ruler that shows up here is Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth, nicknamed the Virgin Queen, also nicknamed Good Queen Bess. She was the daughter of Anne Boleyn, who she didn't start it, but over whom all this trouble started to begin with, and then she was promptly beheaded. She's also the half-sister of Bloody Mary, Mary the First, and she wanted a strong, independent England with their own religion, their own trade, and their own foreign policy. She was a visionary in that way, stateswoman, if you will. But what that meant was back to Protestantism, their own church. So here we have the entire populace of England flip-flopping back and forth between which branch of Christianity they are supposed to be following. And I would add at this point that if any one of them had had any sort of family counseling, or psychotherapy. Rivers of blood could have been unshed. You know, Queen Elizabeth, would you like to talk about your anger at Mary I for the way she treated people? No, I'd prefer to murder all the Catholics. Okay, fine. So this ego and ambition of this handful of human beings made all of this horrible bloodshed happen in Europe over hundreds of years. And for those of us who were lucky enough to grow up in this country, getting used to, taking for granted the separation of church and state. This is why, just one example, I mean, it's one country, but I mean, for centuries and millennia, the whims of a few people have been dictating the fate of millions and millions of people. And you can see with just this silly germ of the guy, I'm unhappy in my marriage, can I get an annulment? No. All of this has popped up. So, I will move on. But it's just so frustrating when you see how it started. I mean, really, these two, what would Jesus do? None of this. And everybody, okay, all right. So, moving along. In Spain, at this point, there's a Catholic king. His name is Philip, and he is the widower of Mary I, Bloody Mary. They have this plan. They are going to get rid of the Protestant government. They're going to reinstall the Catholics, and they're going to put Mary, different Mary, Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne because it is suspected that she's a Catholic. They can't be sure, but she hasn't come out against it. And if they just get this whole invasion settled, it's all going to pave the way for a wonderful Catholic England again. And so in 1588, people on the shore of England look around, and here comes the Spanish Armada. I mean, and they have a great navy. This is very intimidating. Britain also has a great navy. Ultimately, this thing is quelled, and it is unsuccessful. But this overreach of Spain started animus with England for hundreds of years, even to the point where, you know, France gets so much credit for helping the American cause during the American Revolution, and it is deserved. But a lot of people don't know that a lot of the money came from Spain, and a lot of these merchant sailors who were turning into pirates and privateers were being paid with Spanish gold, with Spanish monarchs on it. I mean, this was an old feud that lasted over 200 years, and finally Spain went, yeah, we'll give you the money to mess with England. That's fantastic, you know? So, anyway, the tension in England is rising and rising and rising, and during Protestantism, it is high treason for a priest to even enter England, let alone live there. Well, of course, there are still priests in England. They don't go away, but they are hiding. And it's sort of like the witness protection program. They would dress themselves in very plain clothing. They would keep a solitary life. They would come into, you know, a village under the guise of being a school tutor from a different village or a distant cousin or a this or farmhand, whatever. They were secret priests, and they were called Jesuits. The Jesuit order was founded in 1540, and it was like secret ops for Catholic priests. The SWAT team. So they sneak in, and they are being hunted, systematically hunted, by people called pursuivants, and they are priest hunters. And so here you have this shadow operation of Catholic priests trying to spread the Catholic version of the Bible around and the good word of the Lord and all of that. And then you have royally appointed priest hunters going village to village trying to suss out who is lying about being a school tutor from a different village. And so normally these people are wearing rags and they're very, you know, in the shadows, but not this guy, Father John Gerard. Father John Gerard went the other way. He thought, if I get myself a big enough personality and a big enough aura around me, no one is going to believe that I'm a Catholic priest. So he dresses in the finest of clothing. He's fancy. I mean, he's a fashion plate, and he gambles, and he wins. And he tells jokes, and they're hysterical, and he's the toast of every tavern he's in. He's just this huge, huge personality. And people are so shocked to find out eventually he's a Catholic priest. So, poor Father John Gerard gets sent off to the Tower of London. The Tower of London still exists in London today. You can go there as a tourist. And even as a tourist, with everything sanitized and people like me standing there pointing at stuff, it is a horrible place to visit because what they tell you is what used to go on in there. It is so gruesome. And basically, to make a long story short and skip a lot of the details, the Tower of London was basically a one-way ticket to torture until you confess to whatever. And then once you've confessed, you get executed for whatever you confess to from the torture. I mean, it was monstrous in there. And if you go through and see any of the exhibits, it doesn't take long to go, oh, this is not a place you want to end up. Well, Father Gerard ended up there nonetheless. And he was being, tortured for a long time. I'm laughing at that. It's just like he was there for so long that he got to know his own torturers, and he was a really charismatic guy, and they kind of started to like him, and, oh, God, what are we going to do today? And so it became like a relationship between Father Gerard and the people who were there to ply the information out about who are the Catholics. And one day, Father Gerard, as they're coming into his chamber to begin the, whatever, he drops to his knees and he begins praying to the Lord above so fervently, with so much passion. Give me the strength not to reveal the Catholics in the country, please, Jesus, by your grace alone, and this and that. He's carrying on, he's beating his chest, to the point where the torturers that day went, well, he's stolen our thunder. We're not going to be able to top this energy at all. Should we have a cup of tea? And they take the day off. There's a written account of them being like, well, you see, we didn't think we would break the man. He was very invigorated with Jesus. And so we had a tea and that was it. Well, he was stalling for time because what he knew and what they did not know, these jailers, is that he was hatching a scheme. Father John Gerard, through charisma, through connections and cunning, had devised a plan to escape from the Tower of London with a rope from his cell all the way across the moat to safety. Not only did he do that, but he turns to this one guard who was like his guy, appointed to his cell all the time. And he said, listen, I've got good news and I've got bad news. The bad news for you is that I am escaping. The good news is that I have also secured your escape from this whole life. If you come with me, we have it arranged. You can go to another village and begin a new life right away. If you don't come with me, you work here. What do you think is going to happen to you when they find out that you let me escape? What's your choice? And the guy says, I'm in. And so the two of them, down this rope to safety. And one goes one way, one goes the other way. And those two never met up again. So, in the meanwhile, this guy, Nicholas Owen, I'm leaving the saint off his name for now, because let's just talk about Nicholas Owen. He was a Jesuit layman. So he wasn't clergy, he was a layman, but he was, hanging with the Jesuits and the Catholics, and he traveled from town to town under the name Little John. And he was a prolific builder of what was called priest hides. You'll also hear them referred to as priest holes. And the techniques he used were carpentry, masonry, and trompe-l'oeil. When you see like a floor painted so it looks like there's a staircase and people are walking and you're trying to go down the stairs, but it's just paint, that's trompe-l'oeil. And you can employ it in many, many ways. And he used it to make these secret hiding places in these grand homes that would harbor Jesuit priests. So here, even in this depiction here, you can see him with his saw and his little model of, a home. And look in the right corner of the picture. There's a little hand pushing a board, and you can tell that it's a priest because he's going, oh, I forgot my crucifix. Sorry, I'll be right back. And so this is Nicholas Owen. Here are some examples of what he could do. This is a hole in a closet, I believe, that you pick up the floorboard and here is, this very, very steep ladder going down. And by the way, that's the entirety of the thing. There's no like going around the ladder to different chambers. It is a hole that a person could hide in because, well, I'll get to why it needed to be so small. But also this one is incredible. This is inside of a fireplace. So if you heard from, the neighbors that the pursuivants were coming, and you had a priest in your house, you could lift this thing up, get the priest down in the holes, and start a fire really quickly, and then just stand in front of the fireplace cooking or warming yourself, and there's a priest underneath, and who's going to believe that? So this is just insanity. And the priest hunters, meanwhile, no, we'll get to him in a minute, I'll stay on this. The priest hunters, as I said, they were royally appointed bands of men, and their tactics for hunting included intercepting correspondence between people, between villages, measuring the entirety of the outside of a house, and then going inside and measuring it again to see if there were any compartments in the walls that didn't make sense. They would knock on the walls to find hollow spots. They would also sometimes pretend to leave. They'd make a big show. All right, I guess you're clear this time. We'll get you next time. And they would bind and gag the family and then sort of pretend to leave and then just sit there in silence. And the family in the home couldn't warn anybody. And oftentimes the priest would think the emergency was over and they would pop out and they would nab him. This Father John Gerard, the swashbuckling gambler guy, he once survived and evaded in one of these priest hides for 9 days. These guys had nothing better to do than hunt priests. It was their only mission, and they were very, very good at it. So one of the things that struck me in reading about this is there's a historian discussing them, and he said, yeah, we know about roughly 70 examples of this guy's work, Nicholas Owen, but he was so prolific and so masterful that it is very likely there are many more yet undiscovered priest hides in these halls in Europe, in England. Now, King James finally comes along. King James, if you unpack his name a little, it is King James the Sixth of Scotland and King James the First of England. This marks the United Kingdom, the unification of Scotland and England, for better and worse. That's a whole other thing, but okay, this is the guy. And he is the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, who was supposed to be installed with the Spanish Armada in 1588. He promised to be tolerant of Catholics and end all the bloodshed. So he's still continuing Protestantism, Church of England, all of that, but he said he's going to be tolerant of Catholics. And his tolerance was underwhelming. So, now we get to this group of people called the plotters. The leader of this group is actually this guy here, Robert Catesby, or Catesby. Robert Catesby hatches a plan to stockpile enough gunpowder to blow up Parliament and the House of Lords and every person in it on the opening day of Parliament in 1605. So why would he do that? What's up with him? Well, he was born in Warwickshire, and he was the son of recusant Catholics. So basically, the tolerance of Catholicism basically amounted to, if you renounce everything that you say you believe in, we will allow you to live. That was it. And Catesby's father spent many, many years in jail only for being a Catholic. And so the term we give it now is radicalization. He was a young kid watching his father jailed for absolutely no reason at the whims of those in power. And so he decided that he was going to get back at the people in power. And so here we are. So he was very angry at James I for his broken promises of leniency and, progress. And he also had a charismatic and magnetic personality. So he was disgruntled, but convincing. And so he was having meetings with people all over the place, and he was kind of spilling this plan out little by little and seeing if he could trust them. Well, in the meantime, Catesby here had a servant. In this photo, or this drawing rather, it's the guy all the way closest to me. He has got no hat on, and he doesn't even have a first name. He's Bates. And he doesn't have a first name because he doesn't deserve a first name because he's a serving man. And so he is actually the servant of Catesby, and his life isn't that bad. Bates himself has a serving man, and he has a family, and he lives with a wife and on the property that Catesby owns, and so he's got, enough money, and he's got a life of his own, and he also owned a suit of armor, which in that time was extravagant. So the serving man was wealthy enough to have armor and a serving man, and he was also no dummy. And Bates was observing Robert Catesby going out at all hours of the night and coming back with flimsy excuses and this, that, and the other. And finally he said, boss, I think you're up to something. I'd like you to be honest with me. I spend all day serving you, and I feel like there's something you're not telling me. And so Catesby says, what do you think it is? And Bates says something to the effect of, I feel like you are going to blow up Parliament and the House of Lords on the opening day of Parliament. And Catesby goes, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is, you're right. The bad news is, join or die. And so Bates says, well, I have a pretty good life and I feel like I can trust you, so I'm in. So that's guy number 2. Next up, we have 2 brothers from York, John Wright and Chris Wright. Christopher, well, you can see where their names are. Christopher is right near me, and, his brother's right next to him, John Wright. So these guys have nicknames, Jack and Kit. John is Jack, Christopher's Kit, Jack and Kit Wright. These 2 are like maniacal swordsmen. They're born in York, and Kit Wright was very, very good with his sword, and he had a sister named Martha. The 2 brothers had a sister named Martha who married Thomas Percy, who is now another guy in the plot. So the plot is quite literally thickening with all of these family relations. Thomas Percy, the guy who I just introduced, he was described as tall and impressive, and also belligerent and eccentric. He was quoted by a Jesuit, described as rather wild and given to the gay life, a man who relied much on his sword and personal courage. I lived with a guy like this in college. It was exhausting. There's the kind of guy, like, if he's on your side, it's great, until he turns. So he's a volatile character. Robert Winter, in this depiction all the way to your right, winter is spelled like the season. Over here, this guy. Oh, Robert, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the last names. Thomas Winter and Robert Winter. Yeah, I'm like John Gerard and his jailer. I'm going this way, I'm going that way. Anyway, the only point I'm making with the spelling is if you read about them, sometimes it's Wintour. Spelling in the 1600s was very loose. People, if you could read it all, it didn't matter. If you could get enough letters on the page, they go, yeah, we'll call that the same word. That's fine. So Robert Winter and Thomas Winter. Robert Winter was recruited into the plot. He ended up being tried and executed in London in 1606. Thomas Winter was the cousin of Catesby, and he was fluent in several languages. He was trained as a lawyer, but instead he became a soldier. So this guy is a very, very intelligent guy with the world, in his palm. And what he decides to throw his weight behind with all of these brains and courage is this plot. And so he goes to Spain, being fluent in many languages, and he meets Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes was born in York. His father died when he was 8 years old, and his mother married a recusant Catholic, so, really a Catholic, but always living under fear of persecution for it. And Guy converts to Catholicism, and he goes as a young man, an adult though, he goes to Spain and fights with the Spanish against the Dutch. And he takes the name Guido. It's Guido. So you can hear it said Guido, but Guido is the name he always went by. And he meets Thomas Winter, and he travels back to England, and he's introduced to Robert Catesby. And so he is now folded into the plot. And his personality is described as pleasant of approach and cheerful of manner, opposed to quarrels and strife, loyal to his friends, a man highly skilled in matters of war. And so this was a school friend of his that describing the character of Guy Fawkes. Now, this next slide here is his signature. And there are other instances of seeing his handwriting that are clearer than this. This one was signed on a confession at the Tower of London. So you can just imagine the state of this person who is forced to sign his name. But the reason that I show it to you is because he signs it Guido. He had taken this name not only in his life, but as part of his cause, to show his fealty to the Catholicism of Spain and Italy. So he has gotten rid of the name Guy. He's all Guido. Now, this is a modern version of the pub in which these plotters met. It's called the Duck and the Drake. We can assume that this is not the same building or the same pub, and to me, once I started really thinking about it, I said, well, in the 1600s, it probably would have been like a picture of a duck and a picture of a drake. Because, like I say, nobody could read, so why are you going to put words on a thing? The British pubs have these wonderful names, the Hound and the Fox, the Bull and the this and the. It's because people were illiterate, but they're still thirsty, and if you owned that pub, you put very easily identifiable pictures outside, like cartoons, so that, should we meet at the Goat and the Firkin? Yes, sure. So the Duck and the Drake is where these guys were meeting. In Boston, there's actually still a pictograph. They're called pictographs. And in Boston, right near City Hall Plaza, that big, ugly expanse, there's this Starbucks where on the second story, there's a big golden tea kettle hanging off of it that holds, and it steams. That actually dates all the way back to the 1800s. We were still one of the largest seaports on the East Coast, and sailors and merchants were coming from all over the world, and either they couldn't read or they just couldn't read English, but the people who owned the tea company wanted to sell tea. So that pictograph is, part of our tradition, local tradition, which we got from the British tradition. Anyway, so the plot is to rent a basement under the House of Lords, which sounds crazy because government buildings are like secure fortresses now. But back in that time, you go through the trouble of building a building. How much money can you squeeze out of it? Oh, a barber wants to rent this horse stall? Yeah, sure, you get it. Oh, this guy wants to store firewood? Oh, yeah, no problem. And so this House of Lords had a basement, like a couple levels of basement, where all these like unsavory rooms were available for let. And so the plotters decide, all right, we're going to tell everybody we're storing firewood in here. So they have legal documents, they pay a rent for this place, and it's theirs. So they're going to fill it up with gunpowder, and they're going to blow up King James and Prince Charles unless they can kidnap him. They're also going to kidnap Princess Elizabeth and install her as the titular Queen of the Midlands, where Catholicism is very strong, and lead a Catholic revolt. This is the whole plan. It's not just about the explosion, it's then what? We're going to capture the kid, because he could be swayed. We're pretty sure this girl is a Catholic, but just doesn't want to tell her dad. We're going to get rid of the dad, because he's not tolerant enough, and we're going to blow up everybody else, because who cares? The physics of the blast have been analyzed, and had it happened, it would have obliterated an area of a quarter mile, like a crater just. And this is a more modern incarnation of what that building would have been. This sketch is from the 1800s, so you can imagine 200 years prior how small and flammable that building would have been had this plot been successful. Well, the trouble with this plot is that there was a pandemic. Society is shut down. People are washing groceries. Everybody's on Zoom. Nobody's going out. Pestilence, plague. It's very much a bring out your dead situation. You see coffins and it's just misery. And so Parliament's opening is delayed. And so they have to kick this plan from July, when it was going to open, all the way to November. Things have calmed down, people are starting to go back out, society is opening up, and Parliament is going to be open in November. But the other problem with this is that this original plan that just had 5 people now has 13 people. It's hard enough for 2 people to keep a secret if they're both alive, let alone 13. So, here we have William Parker, 4th Baron of Monteagle. He was a Catholic, and as part of King James's leniency to Catholics, he was allowing Catholics to become lords. And so William Parker, 4th Baron of Monteagle, was a Catholic who gets a letter, an anonymous letter. And it says, "My lord, out of the love I bear to some of your friends, I have a care of your preservation. Therefore, I would advise you, as you tender your life, to devise some excuse to shift your attendance at this Parliament, for God and man hath concurred to punish the wickedness of this time. For though there be no appearance of any stir, yet I say they shall receive a terrible blow, this Parliament, and yet they shall not see who hurts them." So here is the letter. This is still preserved 400 years later. So it's an anonymous letter, but everybody's saying, who wrote this, who wrote this, who wrote this? It was most likely this guy, Francis Tresham. He was the brother-in-law and friend of Lord Monteagle, and he was also a recruit in the plot. He was one of the 13 entrusted with this secret. And let me put it this way. Based on how much I've read about this guy, if he didn't write the letter, his reputation has been maligned for 400 years because everybody points to him. In fact, Catesby and Thomas Wintour, the leader and the brilliant, lawyer, soldier, linguist guy, go and they confront him. And they say, "We know that you wrote this letter." And somehow Francis Tresham convinces them, "No, I didn't." And so, okay, so that fizzled. They're like, "Oh, I guess we're wrong. I wonder who did." Well, it was a disaster because this guy, Robert Cecil, he was the Secretary of State. And you know how, we all know how, when there's a figurehead who's supposed to be in charge, but really it's the sidekick, the evil sidekick who's running everything. Well, Robert Cecil was, smirking into his robes because he knew that anti-Catholic sentiment was fomenting in the country. And so even though he had this letter in hand, he wanted to delay and delay and delay and let people get more and more angry and more divided and bitter on this Protestant Catholic thing. And so he sits on this letter. He does show it to King James, though, because Parliament's going to open and it's a matter of security. And King James was not thrilled by this because his own father died in a huge explosion. So he was a little bit wary of just pretending nothing was wrong. So he orders a search of Parliament, everywhere. He wants to find out what's going on and who would be delivering a terrible blow. So Cecil conducts a search. And the search actually includes all of the buildings and the little warren of buildings under the House of Lords and Parliament. And they even find Guy Fawkes in there. And he's surrounded by firewood. And he, how's it going? What's up? Oh, we're looking for people. There's a terrible blow. No, I don't know anything. I'm just drying out this firewood for the winter. Okay, bye. And so everything's fine. And Robert Cecil goes back and he reports to King James that, I think Parliament can open. I think it's all fine. We searched the whole property. And James just doesn't like it. He goes, I don't believe you. I believe you did it, but I don't believe that you did it carefully enough. Send them back again. And so, as the lords are getting ready to enter the building, as the king is getting ready to enter the building, the soldiers, the stormtroopers go back through the building, and they find Guy Fawkes again, this time All the firewood has been moved, and he is surrounded by gigantic barrels called hogsheads of gunpowder, enough to blow up a quarter mile in every direction. So there are many depictions of this moment of capture. Here's one that is, a sketch, ink and paper drawing. This, I believe, is a Gauguin. This is a painting that is, stylized and very beautiful. Here is something that would appear in like a kid's, book in the library, in the school library, trying to, ramp up the swashbuckling. Here, same sort of vibe here. It's like a comic book almost. You can see, on my side here, he's getting rid of the firewood and he's over the barrels. On the other drawing, he's being led out of the room against his will. And here is another one with a poem. Now it's weird font, weird spelling, but I'll try to read it to you. Infernal Fawkes with demonic heart, being ready now to act his hellish part, booted and spurred, with lantern in his hand and matches in his pocket, at the door doth stand. But wise Lord Nevitt, by divine direction, him apprehends and finds the plot's detection. So, Guy Fawkes is dragged into this room called the King's Privy. It's basically a private quarter for the king. And these people are all invited because it's a spectacle. They've got this rat from the hole and they're going to question him. And at first he just gives them his alias, which is John something. John Johnson. That's his great name he came up with, John Johnson. That was his alias, and then eventually that falls by the wayside, and he admits to trying to blow up the House of Lords and the Parliament. And he starts expressing his regret at failing to do so. And King James, of course, remember, he's King James the Sixth of Scotland, first of England. King James says to him, "Why do you want to do this?" And Guy Fawkes is quoted as saying, "To blow you Scotch beggars back to your native mountains." And King James goes, I don't like it, but I respect it. This guy's brave. I mean, we're still going to kill him. He's going to the tower, but this guy. Anyway, so King James describes him as having a Roman resolution. I guess that's a compliment. And boom, into the Tower of London goes Guido Fawkes, and the torture begins with manacles, and it proceeds by degrees to worse and worse and worse and worse by specific order of James I. And eventually Guido gives up the plot and all the conspirators. So Catesby and some of his buddies, they run to the Midlands of England, which, as I say, has strong Catholic strongholds in it. And they're trying to escape, but they're also trying to drum up support and money, because now there's, 13-ish or more of them trying to run into the countryside, and they have to escape, but they were too late escaping town, and the authorities were on their trail. So the Sheriff of Worcester and 200 men were only 1 day behind them. So every moment they delayed, they were getting gained on by these soldiers, and they ended up having a final stand at this house called Holbeck House. And it's horrible. It's a shootout. It's like Butch Cassidy. It's the end, it's like just gunfire everywhere. And these are like blunderbusses from the 1600s. It's black powder and you're tamping it in and the balls are shooting everywhere. And it is chaos and bloodshed, horses and people dying everywhere. And they finally find Catesby after all the smoke clears. And he was inside the house clutching a portrait of the Virgin Mary as he died. So look, whether you agree with him or not, he meant it as hard as he could. All of these people did, So inevitably, all the surviving people end up at the Tower of London. And Nicholas Owen, the trompe-l'oeil, mason, carpenter, priest hide, building guy, he is also captured as they are rounding up all of these people. and he's arrested, and he dies at the Tower of London. And Robert Cecil, the guy who was sitting on the anti-Catholic sentiment, he's quoted as saying, "It is incredible how great was the joy caused by his arrest, knowing the great skill of Owen in constructing hiding places and the innumerable quantity of dark holes which he had schemed for hiding priests in England." So Owen is executed, and he was canonized in the year 1970 by Pope Paul VI. So when I showed you the slide, he was Saint Nicholas Owen. He is now the patron saint of escapologists and illusionists. So if you know a magician on hard times, he is supposed to pray to Saint Nicholas Owen. Guy Fawkes, meanwhile, he is scheduled for execution. He's been through the mill, and it's been awful. And January 31st, he is being led up to these public gallows and knowing what is going to happen to him, which is hanging and then drawing and quartering. He finds a way to jump off of the scaffolding head first, and he breaks his own neck so he doesn't have to be present for the rest of what happens to him, which does, in fact, still happen. So that is sort of how the story of Guy Fawkes ends, the factual story. But I'm just going to read this poem through. Remember, remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Guy Fawkes and his companions did the scheme contrive to blow the king and parliament all up alive. Okay, so that's factual information, just, that's the story. A little more. 80 barrels laid below to prove old England's overthrow. But by God's providence, him they catch with a dark lantern lighting a match. A stick and a stake for King James' sake. If you won't give me one, I'll take two. The better for me and the worse for you. So now they're calling for a bonfire. I want a stick and a match, and we're going to have a little fire here. And then it starts getting into this weird anti-Catholic thing of a rope to hang the Pope, a pennyworth of cheese to choke him, a pint of beer to wash it down, and a jolly good fire to burn him. Holla boys, make the bells ring. Holla boys, God save the king. Hip, hip, hooray. So this goes from a factual account of what happened to now we're going to start celebrating. And by the way, here's to the Catholics and the popes. And this is the poem that little children are taught even today in England. So here is a depiction of an early bonfire night, because on November 5th, 1605, the day that the plot was uncovered, Londoners were encouraged to celebrate with bonfires. Eventually, it became an act of parliament that made it official, the day of Thanksgiving for the joyful day of deliverance. Fireworks were then the tradition from the 1650s onward. Effigies start appearing in 1673, and they were usually of the Pope, which we were getting up to that too in Boston here. It was a whole other thing. But then the guy is an effigy that's made by kids. And so things have shifted from making, here's another bonfire night. It's in a little rural village. And this is an effigy made by children to look like Guy Fawkes. And you can see he's sitting on a little powder keg there. And they burn these things. And it's part of the celebration. Here is the procession of a guy, and you can see the ads in the background, fireworks, use caution, insurance, there's a florist shop, but there we go, the little children. And here's another effigy of a guy in a different version of the poem with, please to remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I see no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. A stick and a stake for Victoria's sake. So the monarch has changed. We're in progress here. We've got a queen that they're celebrating. Holla boys, God save the queen. But the effigies continue. Here's another silly, goofy one. And this is in a town called Lewes in England. And this photo is only a couple years old. This is where we get into like the grown-up celebrations of bonfire night. You can see the effigy, dark, Guy Fawkes, Guido, tied, bound, gagged on the thing. And here is another. Now look how cartoonish these are getting. They were getting way far away from the beard and the hat and all of that. It's just, these are like lumps of fabric. They're like scarecrows now. This looks to me, I don't know, 1930s-ish. Here we go. Look at this adorable little scene. This kid built this little guy. Penny for the guy. He's raising money with his dog. And here's another cute dog pulling that freakish little Guy Fawkes. What? But you can see it's taking the teeth out of what Guido Fawkes was trying to do, and it's just becoming this really fun thing to let the kids have some, it's, sort of like trick-or-treating almost. Look at these cool dudes. This is like late 60s, early 70s. Even Guy Fawkes got a hoodie with a skier on it, corduroy pants, fantastic. And this one made me, this I found on the internet, rainy day after school, well, all you need is this and that. And they're making these little Guy Fawkes on rainy days. And this looks like, I don't know if you guys remember Mr. Bill from Saturday Night Live, that poor little puppet that always got it. This is so far from the true terrorism that was being executed upon the monarch that, Now, here's back to Lewis, because it's just so impressive to see, the care that they take in making this effigy. And you can see, so in the foreground here, this looks like a rugby team pushing the fire cart and like arrows. Look at the arrows in his back, burning. But look in the background, there are drawings like from the one I showed you of all the plotters. And back there's John Wright, Christopher Wright, Jack and Kit Wright. So all of these, and look at this, anti-Catholicism, burning crosses and crazy, and it's, look how seriously they take this. It's a spectacle. Really, I would liken it to our Independence Day. Every city, every town, every home, every village, they're all celebrating national pride with pyrotechnics. Here is Parliament, the building that was supposed to be blown up, now shooting off fireworks to celebrate the fact that they were not blown up. Now, in literature, suddenly, I'm looking for the year here. So Guy Fawkes was toasted eventually as the last man to enter Parliament with honest intentions. And that was a history professor at the University of York. And there's a romantic novel that appears in 1841, Guy Fawkes, or The Gunpowder Treason. And it was written by this guy, William Harrison Ainsworth. And the reason that it is significant is because Guy Fawkes is depicted in generally a favorable light 200 and change years later. He becomes, with this, an acceptable fictional character. And he started appearing in children's books and penny dreadfuls, like, the British version of Pulp Fiction, just cheap books that are salacious and fun. Here is a theater poster for a pantomime. Pantomime is like a whole genre of theater with like swashbuckling and you must pay the rent, I can't pay the rent, that sort of nonsense. And you can see Guy Fawkes, the Gunpowder Plot, and down below, arrival of Guido Fawkes, the plot, yes, death, capture Guido Fawkes. And so it's just this really, exciting, fluffy entertainment. And in the pantomimes, by the time Guy Fawkes shows up, and by the time this play was being produced, rather than having a costume of the 1600s, what he would have been wearing, he is now appearing as like Harlequin the clown. The jester hat and the black and white checkered clothing. The reputation and the image of Guy Fawkes has been developing over the years. Here is, sort of a stage scene from British pantomime. And this weird guy, that's Guido Fawkes, in the plot. And this is the sort of set where, like, one door opens as the other one closes, and it's mistaken identity, and men are women, and who done it. He's also a comic book villain. Here's another, illustration of this that would accompany the very basic, like, easily digestible text of the story. And then, in 1988, a comic book was created by Alan Moore, the writer, and David Lloyd, the illustrator. And this comic book as a whole depicts a dystopian, post-apocalyptic, near-future history version of the UK in the 1990s. So remember, it's written in 88, so it's only, set a few years in the future, but it's a dystopian story. And V for Vendetta is the name of this series of books. And look at what they've done with the face of Guy Fawkes. You compare that with all the images we've seen and how they have made it very, I don't know what the word is, very, very clear and anonymous at the same time. It is a mask that you can put on. And in fact, in this story, this character is not supposed to be Guy Fawkes. This is a vigilante who is putting on the mask of Guy Fawkes, understanding who the real Guy Fawkes was and his place in society. So here is another, this is an actual physical mask. That one was a drawing. This is a tangible mask you can hold and put on your face. And so, because it became such a great big deal as a comic book, they made a movie. This is a still from the movie. You can see the actor wearing the mask. He's armed to the teeth. He's great at fighting. He lives in the shadows. This is an image from the movie as well. And if you haven't seen the movie, this doesn't spoil anything. This is actually the movie poster that would be in the lobby as you pay to go in. But look, everyone is wearing a Guy Fawkes mask in this. It is the I Am Spartacus moment of this film. And this film was made in 2006. It's a dystopian political action film centering on an anarchist and a masked freedom fighter who attempts to ignite a revolution through elaborate terrorist acts. And this became such a big movie that there was merchandise. You can have a bobblehead. You can have Legos. You can get a tattoo. And then it took a bit of a serious turn. All this merchandising is fun and silly, but then it took a bit of a serious turn in 2006. Anonymous was this group, and they were hackers, computer hackers, that were working against various governments and organizations that they didn't like. I don't know which governments, but I know that the organizations they were targeting for malfeasance and ethics were the Church of Scientology, the Westboro Baptist Church. I'm not going to get into what those groups were up to, but suffice to say that these hackers were skilled enough at their task that the operations of these organizations were so severely handicapped that in 2012, Time magazine named Anonymous, the hacker group, one of the 100 most influential people in the world. The group reemerged in 2020 to support the George Floyd protests. So if you saw those protests, you would have seen this mask in there. Occupy Wall Street goes back to 2011. Protests against the economic inequality in Zuccotti Park in New York City's financial district, and it gave rise to wider Occupy and in U.S. and other countries' Occupy movements. You can see here this guy wearing a press pass that has the Guy Fawkes face on it, wearing a mask that has Guy Fawkes face on it. Even to the point where Turkish Airlines in 2013, they were protesting working conditions and they were protesting pay and recent firings. And so they all get these Guy Fawkes masks on in a public square and they perform a safety presentation as airline employees. And the announcer says, "Fasten and tighten your belts." And the workers, instead of having seatbelts, or they had seatbelts, but they put them on as nooses. And the announcer said, "The protesters are each other's life vests. So if you want to stay alive, cling to each other. These protesters are your best interest." Hong Kong, traditionally for thousands of years, part of China, owned by the West with a lease, kind of. The lease is expiring. China wants it back. Hong Kong doesn't want to be enveloped or eaten up by the Communist Party and the mainland China, and so protests begin. And the leader of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, outlaws masks and outlaws specifically this mask. And this protest took place on the anniversary of the banishment of these masks. So even though they're trying to squash it, this mask still continues to show up. So Lewis Call is a historian who discusses Guy Fawkes. He is now a major icon in modern political culture whose face has become a potentially powerful instrument for the articulation of postmodern anarchism. David Lloyd, the illustrator who created the drawing that became the mask, he said, V, that's the character's name, V's mask symbolizes freedom from tyranny, political, social, or cultural, and even though it's used by many disparate causes all over the world, because the mask is neutral and not tied to one set of beliefs, it's always used for what its users truly believe is good intent. And so, this is basically the end of the talk, but as we approach November 5th in this country this year, remember, I have ideas about this election, and I know I am right. And the other side who doesn't agree with me has ideas about this election, and they also know that they are right. And so, whatever happens this November 5th, there might be protesting in the streets. And if you decide to join them, you know the mask to put on. Thank you very much.
Do you give a presentation or talk at all about your time with the duck boats?
You know, I don't, but I would. I certainly would. There are so many interesting things that have happened. I will tell you one thing that's really neat. So about a month and a half ago, this crazy thing happened where a little, toddler fell into the Charles River. I don't know if you guys saw this in the news. And I'm only telling you this because it ends well. He and his dad were out on a walk on the Cambridge side of Memorial Drive, on the Cambridge side of the river, and the balusters of the railing, the kid just walked right through and fell into the river, and the dad jumped in after him, but then the wall was so high that the dad couldn't climb the wall with the kid in his hand, and he's kind of treading water and doing this, and it just so happened that some of our employees were out there in one of our boats doing safety drills. And all the time we do man overboard drill. What if there's a fire? What do you do? Who do you call for this? What if somebody has a heart attack? And we run through these drills all the time, and we sign a book. And so these two guys are out there doing their morning drills, about to go give a tour, and they hear voices, yelling at them. And they go, oh, hi, yeah, quack, quack. And then they look again, and they see what's going on. And so they went over, and they saved this father and this little kid, and they get the foil blanket, and they have them on the thing, and they were the first there. I mean, by the time they got them to the shore, the police and firemen were just showing up. Everybody was fine, but the sweetest thing, two sweet things. First of all, our ducks have cameras inside and audio, and it's for, if a guest complains, we want to call balls and strikes. Who's right? Customer's always right, unless they're not right, and we want to know. Or a safety concern. If we get in an accident, we want to know what happened, this and that. So after this whole scene, our guys hand the baby to the fireman, who wraps him in a blanket, and the father shakes the hands and this and that, and our two guys get back in the boat, and they're going to the ramp to go to their tour spot. And one of them is a dad, and he's kind of driving the boat, and he's just going, okay, that was crazy. Okay, it was all in a day's work. And the other kid, who isn't a dad, who's young and just the sweetest kid, he just crumples into tears because it was such an intense experience. And he was just so happy that he didn't mess it up. But he was going, I don't know how to hold a baby. I can't believe they handed me that baby. And he was crying, and the guy driving is driving the boat going, there, kid. It's okay. It's okay. And so a couple nights ago, when the Lakers came to Boston, these two guys were honored at center court at the Garden for their bravery and heroism. So, yeah, it sounds like a talk is in order. Yeah. I know it. Anyway, it's quite a life I've lived. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I can't wait to come back.